We're closing off the 5Ds era with my favorite 5Ds archetype, other than Fortune Ladies, of course, which is the Stardust slash Synchron Warrior slash Junk archetype used by the main protagonist of Yu-Gi-Oh! 5Ds, Yusei Fudo. Yeah, it was a very fun deck back in the day, which was, yeah, it topped a few events here and there, but was nowhere near as good as Black Wings. However, despite hosting several monsters which could easily stand up to Black Wings. So yeah, let's see how the machines tick. We start off with their first monster, that being the level 1 unknown Synchron. It's a level 1 with 0 attack and defense, it's a tuner. All Synchrons are tuners, and if your opponent controls a monster and you control no monsters, you can special summon this card from your hand, and you can only special summon him this way once per duel for some reason. And yeah, back in the day this used to be a very popular level 1 tuner, since you can basically open up with him and then build your plays from there. But nowadays you'd expect a monster to do much more. That's why people prefer in a synchro spammy archetype the Speedroid engine instead of this, since basically it builds your plays it builds up your plays much more frequently and consistently than just summoning a monster, and then, well, you have to work on your own. He doesn't offer any additional benefits. Next up we have Turbo Synchron, another level 1 tuner, this one with 100 attack and 500 defense. And if this card declares an attack, you can change the attack target to defense position, and when you take battle damage while this card is attacking, it can special summon one monster from your hand with attack less than or equal to the battle damage you took. It really sounds like a tuner version of the Dark Archetype monster from Yu-Gi-Oh! GX Season 4, the one that Truman used. And yeah, switching monsters to defense mode is the cherry on top, which makes this thing worth running exclusively for the fact that it's a level 1 tuner, or that he is actually required in order to summon a certain Synchro monster. Next up we have Changer Synchron. If this card is sent to the graveyard for a Synchro summon, select one monster your opponent controls, then change its battle position. Again, entirely pointless with the existence of Link monsters. Let's move on. Jet Synchron is another level 1 tuner, and if it is sent to the graveyard for a synchro as a synchro material, you can add one junk monster from your deck to your hand. If this card is in your graveyard, you can send one card from your hand to the graveyard to special summon this card, but banish it when it leaves the field. And you can only use this effect once per turn. Yeah, basically it's free junk monsters, which some of them actually have some nice special summoning conditions or effects which allow them to swarm the field a bit easier. And not to mention that you can actually discard some graveyard reliant monsters in order to bring this thing back at the cost of it being banished. Which, again, you can also... you can do this, but only in different turns, because you can only use one of these effects per turn, and only once that turn. So, yeah. If you could actually use both of these effects once each turn, like at the same time, then I would have actually loved it loved this thing a lot more. But as it is now, yeah, it is a good tuner, and offers you a decent search. And you run it because you have to because you needed to special summon a certain synchro monster, and yeah, that's it. And that's it basically. Next up we have Mono Synchron. When using this card as synchro material, the other synchro material must be a level 4 or lower warrior or machine type monsters, and they're treated as level 1. Yeah, this thing only exists in order to special summon also a certain synchro monster, which does not even require him specifically as a synchro material. So yeah, he is one of the worst Synchrons ever made, actually, in my opinion. Next up we have CYBERSE Synchron. Once per turn you can target one level 4 or lower monster you control, increase its level by its original level until the end of this turn. If your monster in the extra monster zone would be destroyed by battle or card effect, you can banish this card from your graveyard instead, and you can only use this effect once per turn. Yeah, basically this is a card that was released in the earlier, well, the second season of Reigns, and yeah, was used to summon Cyberse Quantum Dragon. and it doesn't fall in any other cyber spam archetype because, well, Playmaker wasn't using a quote-unquote archetype. Well, he used Code Talkers and Firewall archetype, but this thing doesn't even say like Code Talker Cyber Synchron or Firewall Synchron, something that would make it fall under that archetype. So yeah, I'm reviewing it here. And just like Rocket Synchron, who also has Synchrons, and its name is part of the Rocket archetype, not the Synchron archetype. So yeah, there's another Synchron monster which actually falls under a different archetype, which is the Performapal Ori Synchron. We'll get to him on a later day, we sure will. But yeah, basically when you once per turn you get to basically double a monster's level, which can result in some huge level increasage. So you can use this in order to get access to higher level synchros easier, and has a decent protection effect. So I guess it doesn't hurt to run a copy or two. Next up we have their first non-tuner, that being Junkuribo. During either player's turn, when your opponent activates a card or effect that would inflict damage to you, you can send this card from your hand or field to the graveyard to negate the activation, and if you do, destroy that card. Well, basically you get to shut down Trickstars, and that's about as far as it goes. Again, the effects which negate effect damage were obnoxiously present during the 5Ds era, so this doesn't surprise me one bit. So yeah, if you're like playing against Trickstars, then this is a good side card to have around. Next up we have Stardust XIAOLONG. When you Synchro summon Stardust Dragon, you can special summon this card from your hand in face-up attack position, and once per turn this card cannot be destroyed by battle. Yeah, it specifically requires Stardust Dragon, and yeah, that's the only way you're resummoning this via its own effect. And, well, you can use it as a Synchro material or a Link material, but that's about as far as it goes. So yeah, a bit better is Stardust Phantom. When this card you control is destroyed by your opponent's card, either by battle or card effect, and sent to the graveyard, you can select one Stardust Dragon in your graveyard and special summon it in face-up defense position. You can remove this card from play in order to select one face-up Dragon type Synchro monster you control. Once per turn, that Synchro monster cannot be destroyed by battle, but each time this effect is applied, it loses 800 attack and defense at the end of the damage step. It's basically a it was basically one of the only ways you could actually protect your dragon stuff from battle back in the day, and people used to run it because of it. But nowadays there are just so many better options, and yeah, kind of made this card obsolete. Next up we have RIGHTY Driver. This is a level 1 tuner, and for a Synchro summon you can substitute this card for any one Synchron tuner. If this card is normal summon, you can special summon one LEFTY Driver from your hand, deck, or graveyard, and you can only use this effect of RIGHTY Driver once per turn. There's also one other monster in the archetype which can substitute itself for any Synchron tuner, and you're probably asking why is this even a thing? Well, I hinted it out when I talked about Jetwood Synchron and Turbo Synchron. All Synchron warriors pretty much require their respective Synchron in order for them to be summoned, and this basically makes this thing an archetypal king of the swamp. However, LEFTY Driver, the thing this special summons, is their first level 2, and if this card is special summoned, you can make this card become level 3 until the end of this turn. And during your main phase, except the turn this card was sent to the graveyard, you can banish this card from your graveyard, add one RIGHTY Driver from your deck to your hand. You can only use this effect of LEFTY Driver once per turn. It's fine, it's just, I mean, you can increase this thing's level by 3 and then summon like CYBERSE Synchron in order to get this thing to a level 6, and then you have a level 8 Synchro on board, and basically you summon a level 7 Synchro, which is basically anything you want, and then you go into a Crystal Wing. So yeah, I guess there's that utility, and it's basically it's an okay card. It's a bit of a bummer that you have to banish this thing in order to add a RIGHTY Driver to your hand, which kind of goes against the logic of RIGHTY Driver, but I guess easily spammable pairings of monsters were a bit too much, so I guess this works. Next up we have Nitro Synchron. If this card is sent to the graveyard for a synchro summon of a Nitro Synchro monster, draw one card. Spoiler warning, there's only one Nitro Synchro monster in the game, so yeah, if you basically run this in order to get a plus when you summon them using this thing, so I guess it works. Next up we have Satellite Synchron. If a monster is special summoned from your graveyard, you can special summon this card from your hand. If a Synchro monster with Warrior, Synchron, and or Stardust in its name is on your field and or in your graveyard, you can make this card's level become 4 until the end of this turn. You can only use each effect once per turn. It's basically a free monster from however you look at it, because Synchrons and some of their best monsters tend to revive stuff from the graveyard in order to use them for synchro plays, and then basically this becomes a free monster which you can basically turn into a level 4 if you have the appropriate setup, and you most likely are not going to be needing that level 4, but the option's still here if you want to take it. Next up we have NECRO Linker. This is a level 2 Fiend, and you contribute this card to select one Synchron tuner monster in your graveyard, special summon that monster. It cannot be used as synchro material during the turn it was special summoned by this effect. Explaining why this effect is so awful, it would be a waste of oxygen. Let's move on. Next up we have Rush Warrior. During damage calculation in either player's turn, if a warrior synchro monster you control battles an opponent's monster, you can send this card from your hand to the graveyard. Your battling monster's attack becomes double its current attack during the damage calculation only. You can banish this card from your graveyard and target one synchron monster in your graveyard, add it to your hand. You can only use this effect once per turn. You can only use each effect once per turn, sorry. It's basically an archetypal honest and archetypal limiter removal, which is always nice. Not to mention this card has a graveyard effect to compensate for discarding him, which basically lets you recycle a Synchron monster, which basically doesn't have to be a tuner as well, since some Synchron monsters are actually non-tuners, so yeah, run one or two of these. Next up we have Synchron Carrier. Yeah, speaking of non-tuners, here's our first non-tuner Synchron monster. During your main phase, you can normal summon one Synchron monster in addition to your normal summon or set. You gain this effect once per turn. If another Synchron monster is sent to your graveyard as a Synchron material for the synchro summon of a warrior type Synchro monster, while you control this card, you can special summon one Synchron token, machine type Earth level 2, attack 1000, defense 0, and you can only use this effect once per turn. You basically tend to have this around until you perform that second normal summon and got that token out, so you can use them for different kinds of utility effects. And this thing is actually pretty nice. A very nice monster which can be special summoned with a certain monster's effect back from the graveyard, and offers token spawning, which can be used as link material or synchro material. It's overall a very nice card. Run any number of these. Next up we have Synchron Explorer. When this card is normal summoned, you can target one Synchro monster in your graveyard, special summon that target while its effects are negated. Yeah, back in the day this used to be a very nice choice to consider running, but this thing eats up your normal summon, and there are much better ways to revive your Synchrons, so don't bother with this one. Next up we have Junk Encore. For a Synchro summon, you can substitute this card for any one Synchron tuner monster. Once per turn, you can discard one card and target one non-tuner junk monster in your graveyard, special summon that target, and if you do immediately after this thing resolves, synchro summon one synchro monster that lists a synchron monster as a tuner, using that monster and discard only as these synchro materials, and are banished instead of being sent to the graveyard. Breaking news! Junk Encore isn't really much worth running due to the fact that he banishes the materials he uses for synchro summons, which again, there are some monsters which banish themselves, such as Jet or Jet Synchron, but you tend to have as much stuff as possible in your graveyard, since you then can revive it with something in order to further your plays. So yeah, don't bother with this one in my opinion. Next up we have the newest addition to the archetype, that being Junk Converter. You can discard this card, add one tuner, add one synchro monster from your deck to your hand. If this card is sent to the graveyard as Synchro material, you can target one tuner in your graveyard, special summon it in defense position. But it cannot activate this effect this turn, and you can only use this effect once per turn. Basically, if you discard this along with a tuner monster with a graveyard effect such as, I don't know, Jet Synchron, you basically get to add a Synchron monster from your deck to your hand, which can be a tuner or non-tuner, and the monster you'll be searching out most of the time is the ever so fabled Junk Synchron, the OG Synchron monster. It's our first level 3, and when this card is normal summoned, you can target one level 2 or lower monster in your graveyard, special summon that target in defense position, but it has its effects negated. Basically, yeah, it also heats up your normal summon, but the utility it offers is so great, and so many monsters benefits by being summoned by this effect. It also triggers Satellite Synchron's effect, basically, and it's a lot better than Synchron Explorer due to the fact that, well, you can special summon any level 2 or lower monster from the graveyard, which is just amazing. This was for the longest time one of the best tuner monsters ever made, and yeah, until Speedroid Red-Eye Dice came out. And yeah, it's still worth running at least 3 of these because it's just that good. And basically having a junk converter and a tuner monster in your hand basically instance an instant level 8 or higher monsters. So yeah, it's really good. Next up we have Junk Forward. If you control no monsters, you can special summon this card from your hand. It's not bad by any means. It was usually ran because there was just simply no other options left. But now with the Speedroid engine, it basically made this guy obsolete, since again he falls under the same category of unknown Synchron to me. Yeah, he doesn't have a once per duel restriction, but you specifically have to control no monsters in order to special summon this thing. Yeah, next up we have Junk Changer. It's another level 3 tuner, and you can only use the following effect of Junk Changer once per turn. If this card is normal or special summon, you can target one junk monster on the field and either increase its level or reduce its level by 1. It's a bit slow, and it doesn't eat up your normal summon, and yeah, it's basically basically a really slow level manipulation effect, and you most likely want to use CYBERSE Synchron as a better option here. Next up we have Junk Defender. When an opponent's monster declares a direct attack, you can once per turn during either player's turn, you can have this card gain 300 defense until the end of this turn upon this thing being special summoned. Yeah, just run something like Swift Scarecrow or Battle Fader if you feel like you'll be blocking negative direct attacks. Don't bother with this guy. Next up we have Steam Synchron. During your opponent's main phase, you can immediately after this thing resolves, synchro summon using this card you control, and this is a quick effect. Okay, a quick effect, main deck Synchron monster. I guess you can basically, if you can somehow manage to summon this during the opponent's turn, you can basically have some decent disruption already. But this thing's anime effect actually had an additional effect which was its special summoning condition. Its special summoning condition in the anime is if a monster is special summoned by any means, you get to special summon this card from your hand, and the other effect stayed perfectly fine like it is here. I'm not sure why they decided to eliminate its special summoning condition, because I would have called it a much better card if it still had it. But I hear people getting trolled in Black Garden builds using this thing as one of the tech choices, so I guess you can benefit from running it, a few copies of it. Next up we have Drill Synchron. If a warrior type monster you control attacks a defense position monster, inflict piercing battle damage to your opponent, and once per turn you can inflict battle damage to your opponent with this effect, draw one card. Inconsistent and slow, and you basically run it even if you want to get access to a Synchro monster, it requires it. Next up we have Hyper Synchron, their first level 4. If this card is sent to the graveyard for a Synchro summon of a Dragon type monster, that monster gains 800 attack, and also banish that face-up monster during the end phase. Oh, strong numbers and basically nothing else, and you basically lose the monster as soon as you bring it out. Well, if you're turboing it out during the opponent's turn, then yeah, you can basically maybe swing for game, but yeah, this is basically an irrelevant monster and you should never ever run it. Next up we have Road Synchron. When this card is used as a synchro material for a synchro summon, discards by a level 2. If this card attacks at the end of the damage step, increases its level by 1. Basically, I misread that effect. Basically, this card becomes a level 2 monster if you're not using it as a in order to synchro summon Road Warrior, which we will mention soon. It's a very nice synchro monster, but as this thing goes, it has one of the most bizarre level changing effects I've ever seen. So yeah, you basically run this if you want access to Road Warrior, but there are much better accesses to him because we've seen so far 2 monsters which can basically substitute themselves for any synchron required, and then we have 1 more on the way. So yeah. Next up we have Bryce Synchron. If this card is sent to the graveyard for a synchro summon until the end of this turn, the synchro monster that used it as a material gains 600 attacks, but its effects are negated. It's Hyper Synchron, but it's even worse. What else can I say? Don't run it. Next up we have Junk Blader. You can banish 1 junk monster from your graveyard. This card gains 400 attack until the end of this turn. Oh boy, it's a beat stick which has a non-once per turn 400 attack point boost at the cost of draining your resources of valuable junk monsters, so yeah, don't run it. Next up we have Junk Breaker. During your main phase, if this card was normal summoned this turn, you contribute this card. All face-up monsters on the field have their effects negated until the end of this turn. Keep in mind, this also includes your own monsters, so yeah, it's basically a skill drain that eats up your normal summon. And it only lasts until 1 turn, so run if you really feel like it. Next up we have Junk Servant. If you control a junk monster, you can special summon this card from your hand. Free materials, basically run 3 of these. Next up we have Debris Dragon. When this card is normal summoned, you can target 1 monster with 500 or less attack in your graveyard, special summon that target in attack position, but its effects are negated. Cannot be used as synchro material except for the synchro summon of a dragon type monster. The other synchro material cannot be level 4. Yeah, basically you have this is basically a monster that incentivizes you to synchro summon with at least 2 non-tuners. The monster you'll most likely be summoning with this thing is of course Stardust Dragon, since, well, since it obviously looked like Stardust Dragon, look at him. And Stardust Dragon is the only level 8 dragon they have access to in the archetype. I mean, you can use them for other stuff, such as, using a level 3 monster in order to get out Black Rose Dragon or anything other dragon related. You can also use a level 3 in order to summon something like Clearwing Synchro Dragon, and if you have a level 1 tuner to spare, you can go into Crystal Wing, so the option's there if you want to take it. Next up we have Bright Star Dragon. When this card is normal summoned, you can target 1 other face-up monster on the field, increase its level by 2 until the end of this turn. Again, a monster that eats up your normal summon and basically increases level by 2, which is below average in my opinion, since again CYBERSE Synchron is a thing, so yeah, run by preference in my opinion. Next up we have their first level 5, that being actually the last Synchron monster, that being QUICKDRAW Synchron. You can special summon this card from your hand by sending 1 monster from your hand to the graveyard. For a Synchron summon, you can actually substitute this card for any Synchron tuner monster, and cannot be used as a Synchron material except for a Synchron summon of a monster that lists a Synchron monster as a tuner. So basically this is actually the easiest way to summon Road Synchron. We'll get into him later. And basically offers graveyard setup along with providing free materials for either Link or Synchro plays, so he's usually ran at 2 or 3. Next up we have Junk Collector. It's a level 5 with 1000 attack and 2200 defense, and it has a quick effect that lets him banish himself from the graveyard and 1 normal trap in your graveyard and apply the banished trap card's effects, and the trap's activation requirements must still be correct, but the costs are not paid. It may not look like much, but this card is actually a part of the one of the best FTK decks ever made, and is basically the reason why this grass looks greener is currently banned. The deck involves using only 2 monster cards, 1 trap card, and the rest being filled by spell cards. Monsters being Bao Baboon, this thing, and the trap card being Magical Explosion. And you basically know what this means. You basically fill up the graveyard with various spell cards, and then use this thing as a effect from the graveyard, or no, you have to banish him from the field, sorry, and basically apply the Magical Explosions effect in order to inflict a good 8,000 or more damage to the opponent, so yeah. Next up we have the final main deck monster, the level 6 Junk Giant. If your opponent controls a level 5 or higher monster, you can special summon this card from your hand. A synchro summon using this card as material cannot be negated. If a player synchro summons using this card as material, the other player cannot activate cards or effects when that monster is synchro summoned. Yeah, this basically offers protection to the monster you are currently bringing out, as the opponent cannot activate any floodgates in order to get rid of it or something. It has okay special summoning condition as well. I wish it would have been a bit better. For example, if your opponent controls an extra deck monster or something, I would have loved it a bit more. And since it specifically states the level of the monster, that means this thing is pretty much dead if link monsters are on the field, so yeah. Alright, time for the extra deck. First up we have the level 2 Formula Synchron. It's a level 2 Synchron tuner, completely generic, and when this card is synchro summoned, you get to draw 1 card, and once per chain, during your opponent's main phase, you can immediately after this thing resolves, synchro summon using this card you control, and this is a quick effect. For the longest time, and still a bit in today's era, this is one of, if not the most best synchro tuner monsters in the entire game, since on the spot you get a free card as soon as you synchro summon him, and not to mention if you use stuff like tuningware as synchro material, that's basically 2 cards for summoning a synchro monster, which is a very nice endeavor indeed. And basically the synchro summoning during the opponent's turn is a staple effect of all synchron tuner monsters. Well, most of them. We saw yesterday that the Blackwing level 2 the tuner didn't have the effect. So yeah, and you basically run 2 to 3 of these because it's that good of a monster. The other synchro tuner is much less impressive, ACCEL Synchron. It requires requires completely generic materials, and once per turn you can send 1 synchron monster from your deck to the graveyard and activate one of these effects. Increase its level by the level of the sent monster, or reduce its level by the level of the sent monster, and it has the standard quick effect synchro summon effect. It can be on the same level of usefulness as Formula Synchron, but not that often, because it offers graveyard setup, which is always nice, and it can basically alter a very nice level modulation depending on what you need, what you're currently aiming to summon from your extra deck. But it specifically sends synchron monsters to the graveyard, and not every synchron monster had a very good graveyard effect in order to benefit from this. We'll get to a certain synchro tuner monster later on, which we'll see has a much better way of handling this sort of effect. So yeah. Next up we have Catapult Warrior. It's also completely generic, and once per turn you contribute 1 junk monster to inflict the damage to your opponent equal to the original attack of the tributed monster. It's not exactly a Dark Strike fighter. I mean, it is a once per turn effect, but if you can somehow manage to get multiples onto the field, then yeah, you can provide a decent damage output. You basically use this in order to finish games, if anything, so yeah, it's also a run by preference type of card. Next up we have Jet Warrior. Requires Jet Synchron and any non-tuner monsters. And if this card is synchro summoned, you can target 1 card your opponent controls return it to the hand. If this card is in your graveyard, you can tribute one level 2 or lower monster, special summon this card in defense position, but banish it when it leaves the field. Obviously, of course you can use each effect of Jet Warrior once per turn. Yeah, like I said, obviously it's a straight upgrade in terms of revival effects with as what Jet Synchron's effect was. And yeah, you can basically use this as well as Jet Warrior and Jet Synchron in order to gain free link materials or to get a material back for continuing your synchro plays, such as, for example, using this thing and Junk Synchron, for example, to go into Crystal Wing. So yeah, the options here if you want to take it, and yeah, you basically run one or two of these. Next up we have Junk Warrior, the OG Synchro monster. It requires Junk Synchron and any non-tuner monsters, and if this card is Synchro summoned, it gains attack equal to the total attack of all level 2 or lower monsters you currently control. It doesn't seem like much, but along with Copycat or some other low-level monsters which have a gargantuan attack value, such as Mech Lords, you can actually perform very powerful OTKs using this card, and it also has a spell card which helps out in that regard. So yeah, building a deck around this guy can usually be really fun. Next up we have their final level 5, Junk Speeder. Requires a Synchron tuner and any non-tuner monsters. And if this card is Synchro summoned, you can special summon as many Synchron tuners as possible with different names, with different levels from your deck in defense position. You cannot special summon monsters from the extra deck except Synchro monsters the turn you activate this effect. And when an attack is declared involving this card that will Synchro summon this turn and another monster, you can make this card's attack become double its original attack until the end of this turn. You can only use each effect once per turn. This one is basically a restriction away from being busted. If it didn't lock you into Synchro monsters, I could have seen some obnoxious link shenanigans going on and some obnoxious extra linking as well. Thankfully, they limited you to Synchro monsters, which is perfectly fine with this kind of effect, because if you summon this, you're guaranteed to get 5 monsters on the board if you're summoning this in the extra monster zone, that is. So yeah, running 2 of these is usually advisable. For their first level 6 is Junk Gardener. Requires Junk Synchron and one or more non-tuner monsters, and once per turn you can select one monster your opponent controls and change its battle position. This effect can be activated during either player's turn, and if this card is sent from the field to the graveyard, you can select one monster on the field and change its battle position. Completely irrelevant and pointless in the Link era, so don't run it. Next up we have Turbo Warrior, which requires Turbo Synchron and any non-tuner monsters, and when this card declares an attack on a level 6 or higher Synchro monster, halve the attack of that target until the end of the damage step. This card cannot be targeted by effects of level 6 or lower monsters. Pretty unique effect, but overall it's not very appealing due to the fact that it only works on level 6 or higher Synchro monsters specifically, not level 6 or higher monsters in general. So yeah, but at least the second part of the effect kind of works how it was supposed to. But yeah, this used to be a very nice OTK enabler if the setup was right, but nowadays it's a questionable choice to consider running. Next up we have Stardust Charge Warrior. And it's completely generic, and when it's Synchro summon you get to draw 1 card, and you can only use this effect once per turn, and this card can attack all special summon monsters your opponent controls once each. You're most likely weren't going to be using the second effect, because you most likely use this in order to get a free card and then go build your place from there by using this as a material for Crystal Wing. And yeah, that's about as far as it goes. It was played massively because it was a upstart goblin on legs. Next up we have a Stardust Assault Warrior, which is their final level 6. Completely generic, and when it's Synchro summoned while you control no other monsters, you can target 1 junk monster in your graveyard and special summon it. And you can only use this effect once per turn, and if this card attacks a defense position monster, inflict piercing damage. Yeah, again, the effect is even worse than the Charge Warrior, but you get a junk monster which you can use as link material or synchro material, so I guess not everything is bad. But I would have loved it a bit more if it was like Charge Warrior with the second effect. As it is now, Charge Warrior is a better option in my opinion. Next up we have Nitro Warrior, and our first level 7. Requires Nitro Synchron, of course, and one or more non-tuner monsters. Once during each of your turns, if you activate a spell card, this card gains 1000 attack during the next attack, this turn involving this card. During damage calculation only, of course. If this attacking card destroys an opponent's monster by battle, after damage calculation, you can target one face-up defense position monster your opponent controls, change that target to attack position, then this card can make a second attack in a row on that monster. Yeah, back in the day this used to be a very powerful attack and OTK enabler, but in the Link era the effect is borderline useless, so yeah. The effect occurs every 300 duels, and that's about as far as it goes. But still, it's worth running it due to it becoming a very powerful beatstick. Next up we have Junk Archer. This one requires a Junk Synchron and one or more non-tuner monsters. And once per turn you can target one monster your opponent controls, banish it. During the end phase of this turn, return that monster to your opponent's side of the field in the same battle position. Or you cannot be an idiot and just run Fortune Lady Every, which not only does have a non-targeting banish effect, but it's also a better overall monster. You have more attack points and more everything. She just keeps getting stronger and stronger, and she can banish monsters all the freaking time without retrieving them later. So yeah. Next up we have Junk Berserker. Also requires Junk Synchron and any other non-tuners. And you can banish one junk monster from your graveyard and target one face-up monster your opponent controls. That target loses attack equal to the banished monster's attack. And at the start of the damage step, if this card attacks a defense position monster, destroy it immediately. The second effect, while it was admirable back in the day, is ultimately pointless due to the existence of Link monsters. But the first effect more than makes up for it, since the attack reduction is permanent and the effect isn't even once per turn. It's one of the best hitters of the bunch in the Junk archetype. Next up we have Shooting Riser Dragon, the last Synchro tuner monster in the archetype. And it has this effect. It requires a tuner and one or more non-tuner monsters, and if it is synchro summoned, you can send one monster from your deck to the graveyard whose level is lower than this card's on the field, and if you do, reduce this card's level by that monsters. But for the rest of this turn, you cannot activate the effects of the monster with the same name as the sent monsters that had in the graveyard. You can only use this effect of Shooting Riser Dragon once per turn and once per chain. It is basically the standard Synchro tuner Synchro summon effect. It basically allows you to set up the graveyard with possibly any monster you'd ever so desire, at the cost of not being able to use the effects of said monster. So yeah, it also has pretty nice attack values for a Synchro tuner, which is going to become a low level. So yeah, running a Copia 2 couldn't hurt. Next up we have Junk Destroyer, our first level 8. It requires Junk Synchron and any non-tuner monsters, and when it's Synchro summoned you can target cards on the field up to the number of non-tuners used for its Synchro summon and destroy them. Basically one of the best ways when pure Junk decks are gonna go off, and yeah, this basically lives up to the name of being the Junk Destroyer, and you can actually get some nice field wipes with this thing, so yeah, absolutely worth running. Next up we have the aforementioned Road Warrior. Requires Road Synchron and 2 or more non-tuner monsters, and once per turn you can special summon one level 2 or lower warrior or machine type monster from your deck. Just run this guy at 1 or 2 of these, because it special summons any level 2 or lower warrior or machine type monster, which gives this archetype a pretty edgy utility in my opinion, and yeah, it's basically a link spam machine. Alright, now we're going on to the main meat and potatoes. Well, we have Stardust Dragon, the level 8 dragon, the very first Stardust, the very first Signer Dragon, and the Ace monster, protagonist Ace monster of 5Ds, completely generic. And when a card or effect is activated that will destroy a card on the field, quick effect, you can tribute this card, negate the activation, and if you do, destroy it. During the end phase, if this effect was activated on this turn and was not negated, you can special summon this card from your graveyard. Not only was this card meta relevant for quite some time, but this card actually still sees some plays in today's formats. And not to mention that this form of negation was actually pretty unique and powerful for the time this card came around. Basically, what I'm saying is that this is basically the best protagonist ace monster that this doesn't deserve the ban list. So yeah, and there are certain monsters that requires him as a material for something. So running any number of these is usually perfectly fine. Next up, we have the manga counterpart of Stardust Dragon, that being Stardust Spark Dragon. Completely the same summoning stats and summoning requirements as the original, same stats. And once per turn during either player's turn, you can target one face-up card you control. Once during this turn, you cannot be destroyed by battle or card effects. Much like the majority of the player base, I prefer the original Stardust because the protection it offers is a much better option than this thing. Sure, it protects any battle or card effect destruction, and only works on one card, and at the cost of not negating and destroying the card the destruction effect is coming from, which is, some might find it more useful, but I personally prefer the original over this thing. Next up, we have Majestic Star Dragon, the level 10 monster, our first level 10, and requires Majestic Dragon and Stardust Dragon and one non-tuner monster in order to summon it. And during either player's turn, when your opponent activates a card or effect, you contribute this card, negate the activation, and if you do, destroy all cards your opponent controls. Once per turn, you can target one face-up monster your opponent controls, negate its effects until the end of this turn, and you can activate one of its effects as discard's effect during the end phase. You can target one Stardust Dragon in your graveyard, return this card to the extra deck, and then special summon Stardust Dragon. Just like I said with Majestic Red Dragon when I was reviewing the Red Archetype, this is a monster which has some nice and sick effects, but the summoning condition is a bit too costly for those effects to be of any use. If you really feel like it, then run one. Next up, we have Shooting Star Dragon, another level 10, which requires a tuner synchro monster and Stardust Dragon as material, and once per turn you can excavate the top 5 of the cards of your deck, then shuffle them back in. Also, this card's maximum number of attacks per battle phase this turn equals the number of excavated tuner monsters. Once per turn during either player's turn, when a card or effect is activated that would destroy a card on the field, you can negate that effect, and if you do, destroy it. Once per turn, when an opponent's monster declares an attack, you can target the attacking monster, banish this card, and if you do, negate the attack, and during the next end phase, special summon this card by banished by this effect. It's overall an amazing boss monster, which still finds some niche plays and spaces in the extra deck due to the fact it's basically a very popular monster, and basically Stardust Dragon and the Formula Synchron are the best way to summon this thing. And not to mention that the multiple attacking effect can also be handy in situations where you will run a lot of tuners, which is most of the time. So yeah, running this is usually advisable, and basically most of the time he'll be your plan B when compared to a certain other monster, which we'll get into later. What I did not like at all is Shooting Star Dragon Teg Genus expansion. It has the same stats as the original, but a better summoning condition in terms of it requiring any non-tuner synchro monster. And when a monster effect is activated that targets a monster you control, quick effect, you can banish one tuner monster from your graveyard to negate the activation, and if you do, destroy that card. You can only use each of the following effects of Shooting Star Dragon Teg Genus expansion once per turn. When an opponent's monster declares an attack, you can negate the attack, and during your opponent's turn, if this card is in your graveyard, you contribute 2 synchro monsters, special summon this card. Okay, so not only is this worse than the original in every single way, but it's for some reason also the part of the Teg Genus archetype for no explicable reason. And I looked at this right now because, again, this thing does not support either of those archetypes, but I looked at it right now that if I do end up starting the archetype rematch series where I relook at archetypes that got new supports, I don't have to look at this when I look at the Teg Genus archetypes. So yeah, and so bottom line is, don't run this. Next up, we have Stardust Chronicle Spark Dragon. It requires a tuner synchro monster and non-tuner synchro monster as material and must be synchro summoned. Once per turn, quick effect, you can banish one synchro monster from your graveyard. This card is unaffected by other card effects for the rest of this turn. If this card in its owner's possession is destroyed by an opponent's card or by battle or card effect, you can target one of your banished dragon synchro monsters, special summon it. The protection effect is actually okay, but basically I still prefer the original shooting star because it offered some more protection to your other stuff other than the this thing hogging all the protection for itself, and basically drains your resources of valuable synchros, which can even cost you a game at the time. So yeah, it's not advised to run any more than one of these if you really want to feel special and run this thing. Next up we have Stardust Warrior. It requires a tuner synchro monster and any more non-tuner synchro monsters, and during your either player's turn, if your opponent would special summon a monster, you contribute this card, negate then the summon, and if you do, destroy that monster. During the end phase, if this effect was activated and was not negated, you can special summon this card from your hand, and if this card is destroyed by battle, or if this card is destroyed by an opponent's card effect, if it leaves the field by a card effect, you can special summon one level 8 or lower warrior synchro monster from your extra deck, and this special summon is treated as a synchro summon. Basically, it's a floodgate on legs. It's also basically a solemn strike or a bottomless trap hole on legs, which does not have any restrictions in terms of attack points. So it's generally good to have around. But the floating effect is also actually pretty sweet. However, there are very few targets which actually benefit from this because as we see, most of the monsters have effects which activate upon them being synchro summoned. It would have been awesome if you could actually summon Junk Speeder with this thing and then special summon a whole bunch of tuners after that to basically make a whole lot of links next turn if they survive. But yeah, it's a decent option if you choose to run it. And now we have the last warrior monster, that being Satellite Warrior. Yeah, you were probably wondering where the hell Satellite Warrior was. Well, he's a level 10, so he got here a bit late. And it requires any tuner and any or more non-tuner monsters, which is surprising. You'd expect it to require specifically Satellite Synchron. And if this card is synchro summoned, you can target cards your opponent controls up to the number of synchro monsters in your graveyard, destroy them. And if you do, this card gains 1000 attack for each destroyed card. If this synchro summoned card is destroyed, you can special summon up to 3 level 8 or lower warrior synchron and or Stardust synchro monsters with different names from your graveyard, and you can only use this effect once per turn. The floating effect is actually pretty impressive, but it requires a lot of setup in order for it to be viable. And the summon effect also requires a whole lot of setup and basically incentivizes you to summon this in the late game. And yeah, you tend to not go in the late game when you play this archetype. So yeah, if you run this, it's probably not more than one. Alright, now getting on to the part which you all wanted to see. We have the 3 legendary level 12 synchro monsters, that being Shooting Quasar Dragon, which requires the tuner synchro monster and 2 or more non-tuner synchro monsters, which must be synchro summoned and cannot be special summoned by other ways. This card's maximum number of attacks per battle phase equals the number of non-tuner monsters used for its synchro material. And once per turn during either player's turn, when a card or effect is activated, you can negate the activation, and if you do, destroy that card. And when it leaves the field, you get to summon Shooting Star Dragon from your extra deck. Then we have Stardust Cipher Divine Dragon, which has the same summoning conditions as Quasar, and must be synchro summoned and cannot be special summoned by other ways. The first time each card you control would be destroyed each turn by battle or card effect, it is not destroyed. Once per turn during either player's turn, when your opponent activates a monster effect, you can negate that effect, and if you do, destroy one card on the field. You can banish this card from your graveyard and target one level 8 or lower Stardust monster in your graveyard, special summon it. Then we have the last synchro monster, that being Cosmic BLAZAR Dragon. same summoning conditions as well, and same stats as those previous two, and must be synchro summoned and cannot be special summoned by other ways. You can banish this card until the end phase to activate one of these quick effects. When an opponent activates a card or effect, you can negate the activation and destroy that card. When your opponent would summon a monster, you get to negate the summon, and if you do, destroy that monster. When your opponent declares an attack, you get negate the attack and end the battle phase. And that is it. These are basically still to this day the best synchro monsters ever made, and are still heavily ran in synchro focus decks since they are actually pretty easy to summon. And Quasar, well, one of them, either one of them, I viewed an example with Quasar, can be summoned with only 2 cards, and with just a little bit more effort, you get to summon a second one. And if you actually put some more resources, which can be a bit too tricky sometimes, you get to special summon all 3 of them, and if you happen to have them on the field at the same time, you've basically won the game already. If you and especially if you have like Mask of Restrict already on the field as well. So yeah, these are the best synchro monsters ever made, and they shall always remain with that status. Alright, time for the final monster, that being the Link 2 monster, Junk Connector. This one is a Link 2 which points bottom left and bottom right. The one is 1700 attack, requires 2 effect monster, warrior and or machine, including a tuner monster. Once per turn during your the main or battle phase, you can quick effect. Immediately after this effect resolves, synchro summon 1 synchro monster using only monsters this card points to as material. And if this link summoned card you control is destroyed by battle or opponent's card effect and sent to the graveyard, you can special summon 1 junk synchro monster from your extra deck, and it's treated as a synchro summon. This is basically a very nice monster, and it basically you can actually use Junk Speeder's effect a lot more and Junk Speeder's effect is a lot more versatile with this thing being present, and yeah, basically offers an instant comeback upon summoning Junk Speeder by this effect. And yeah, run 1 or 2 of these. Alright, now on to their back row. First up we have the field spell Starlight Junction. You contribute 1 tuner monster, special summon 1 synchron monster from your deck with a different level than the tributed monster had on the field, and during your opponent's turn, if you special summon a synchro monster from your extra deck, target 1 card on the field, shuffle it into the deck, and you can only use each effect of Starlight Junction once per turn. It offers a nice monster spamming from your hand, from your deck, sorry. Basically allows you to replace the tuners which you don't need with the ones you truly need. So yeah, I wouldn't max out on it because it's not as necessary to run it. Yeah, the shuffling effect is kind of neat, but again, it's not as necessary as you might think. Next up we have Tuning. Add 1 Synchron Tuner monster from your deck to your hand, then send the top card from your deck to your graveyard. Run 3. I'm not gonna say anything more. Next up we have Junk Barrage. When the equipped monster destroys a monster by battle and sends it to the graveyard, inflict damage to your opponent equal to half the destroyed monster's attack in the graveyard. Potentially useful effect if you'll actually build your deck around it and equip it to a formidable beast stick, which offers some other effects in order to complement this, but overall just not worth it. Next up we have Scrap Fist. Target 1 junk warrior you control, and if it battles an opponent's monster this turn while you control it, apply these effects. Your opponent cannot activate cards or effects until the end of the damage step. If it attacks a defense possession monster, inflict piercing damage, double any battle damage your opponent takes, cannot be destroyed by battle, and destroy the monster that battled at the end of the damage step. Holy mama, it basically, if you have a junk warrior with at least like 4000 attack, you're basically won the game already. And if you happen to have a defense position monster on the field, good luck with that. Well, you pump them harder and harder, and yeah. Basically a 1 card shot if and the key playmaker in the Junk Warrior OTK. We run 3 of these in the OTK. Next up we have Cosmic Flare. Target 1 Stardust Synchro monster you control. This turn, if that Synchro monster you control battles an opponent's monster, shuffle that monster into the deck at the start of the damage step. If a Stardust Synchro monster you control attribute itself in order to activate its effect, you can banish this card from your graveyard instead. This is genuinely a nice signature attack card, since basically it can get rid of a monster by non-destruction and non-targeting removal. And Yeah, and it also has a nice recursion in terms of banishing this thing from the graveyard in order to spare Stardust Dragon from being tributed in order to activate this effect, which gives you 2 negations per turn. So yeah, great, good card. Next up we have NECROID Synchro. Banish 1 tuner and up to 2 non-tuner monsters from your graveyard, and if you do, special summon 1 Stardust Synchro monster from your extra deck whose levels equal the total levels of those banished monsters, but its effects are negated, and this special summon is treated as a Synchro summon. The part where it negates effects is a bit annoying, since you're most likely going to be now using the card in order to summon a Stardust Synchro monster, which you'll be proceeding to use as a material for, I don't know, shooting Star Dragon or basically anything else that you might want at the time. So yeah, again, it's basically an archetypal miracle fusion, and you run 1 or 2 of these. Next up we have Stardust Shimmer. Select 1 Dragon-type Synchro monster in your graveyard and remove from play other monsters in your graveyard whose total levels equal to the level of the selected monster, and special summon it from the graveyard. Yeah, people used to run it because there were just no better options. And it also targets any Dragon-type Synchro monsters, so there's room for some versatility and splashability, but overall it's genuinely not worth running. Next up we have the final spell card, Synchro Chase, a continuous spell. If you Synchro summon a Warrior, Synchron, or Stardust Synchro monster, you can target 1 monster in your graveyard that was used as a material for that Synchro summon, special summon it in defense position, and you can only use this effect once per turn, and your opponent can activate cards or effects in response to the activations of the effects of Synchro monsters whose original name include Warrior, Synchron, or Stardust. Yeah, this basically gives you one of the materials you use as a Synchro material back, and basically enables very quick access to some higher level Synchros and Crystal Wings. So yeah, good card. Their first trap card is Synchro Deflector. Activate only when a face-up Synchro monster you control is selected as an attack target. Negate the attack and destroy 1 monster your opponent controls. Yeah, it's generic, but it, according to the wiki, is actually part of the archetype, so I'm looking at it as it is. It specifically requires a Synchro monster to be attacked, which is understandable in a Synchro spam archetype. And not to mention, you don't necessarily need to destroy the attacking monster, but any monster the opponent controls, which actually is a pretty good effect. Next up we have Scrap Iron Scarecrow. When an opponent's monster declares an attack, target the attacking monster, negate the attack. Also after that, set this card face down instead of sending it to the graveyard. Yeah, this is actually a very unique form of battle trap, and it actually saw some competitive play in the earlier days of 5Ds, and yeah, basically it's a part of the archetype due to the several other Scrap Iron cards which actually mention junk or Stardust monsters in their name. One of said cards is their newest card, that being Scrap Iron Signal. When your opponent activates a monster effect while you control a Synchro monster that requires a Synchro monster as material, negate the activation. Also after that, set this card face down instead of sending it to the graveyard. You can only activate 1 Scrap Iron Signal once per turn. Okay, so this is a counter trap. Again, it specifically requires something like shooting shooting Star Dragon or anything else that requires a Synchro material as a Synchro monster as material in order to be able to activate it. But the negation it offers is pretty good and very much worth running. Run 2 of these. Next up we have the final Scrap Iron card, that being Scrap Iron Statue. When a spell or trap card that is already face up on your opponent's field activates its effect, destroy that card. Also after this card has been activated, instead of sending it to the graveyard, you can set it face down. If this card is sent to the graveyard, you can target 1 junk monster in your graveyard and special summon it in defense position, and you can only use this effect once per turn. It's okay, and it basically negates pendulum effects and basically any continuous floodgates, which it's a bit of a bummer that it doesn't destroy and remove cards from the field, but I guess there are worse things to consider. Run by preference. Next up we have Shooting Star. If a Stardust monster is on the field, target one card on the field and destroy it. Or you can just summon Junk Destroyer. It's much faster and it doesn't clog up your hand, and it's not slow. It's not a slow trap card. So yeah. Stardust Flash allows you to target a Stardust monster in your graveyard and special summon it. It's a simple monster reborn for the Stardust series of monsters, which is okay, but not enough for you to warrant maxing out on it. Next, but Starlight Road is actually a bit better, and actually saw competitive play. When a card or effect is activated that will destroy 2 or more cards you control, negate the effect, and if you do destroy that card, then you can special summon a Stardust Dragon from your extra deck. It's actually a pretty fun card to pull off, and basically as soon as you activate it, you're guaranteed a level 8 Synchro monster. So yeah, it's saw competitive play for a reason. And yeah, next up we have Stardust Respark. When an opponent's special summon monster declares a direct attack, if its attack is greater than or equal to your life points, negate the attack, and if you do draw one card, then you can special summon a Stardust monster from your extra deck or graveyard. Then you can only activate one of these per turn. It cut me off again, sorry. Yeah, I mean, it's not bad by any means, but its activation condition is a lot more specific than Starlight Road, which makes it worth running a bit less than Starlight Road. So yeah, run by preference. Next up we have Stardust Mirage. If you control a level 8 or higher Dragon Synchro monster, special summon as many monsters as possible from your graveyard that were destroyed and sent to the graveyard by battle or an opponent's card effect this turn. And you can only use one of these per turn. It's a really fun effect that it basically enables you to summon as many of the destroyed monsters as possible, regardless of who they are. It can special summon any monster, so yeah, you don't have to worry about what gets destroyed when. So yeah, also it's a very spicy comeback tool, so running by preference is usually how you play this. Next up we have Stardust Wish, a continuous trap. Once per turn, if a Stardust Synchro monster you control is tributed to activate its own effect except during the damage step, you can target that monster and special summon it. Your opponent cannot activate cards or effects in response to this card's activation. Monster special summoned by this effect cannot be destroyed by battle while in attack position. This basically enables you to have a second negation, just like Cosmic Flare does, but this straight up revives the monster as soon as it got tributed, so it basically the negation effect basically loses its cost at that point. However, it's a once per turn effect, so yeah, which is perfectly understandable. And if you really are focusing on massive negation, and if you really need that massive negation, then this is a good card to have around. And the final card we have today is Converging Wishes. If you have 5 or more Dragon-type Synchro monsters with different names in your graveyard, special summon one Stardust Dragon from your extra deck, and this is treated as a Synchro summon, but banish it during the end phase. Equip it with this card. While equipped with this card, it gains attack equal to the combined attack of all Dragon-type Synchro monsters in your graveyard. Also, while equipped, when it destroys an opponent's monster by battle, you can banish one Dragon-type Synchro monster from your graveyard. It can attack an opponent's monster once again in a row. Yeah, this is basically straight up an adaptation of one of the best anime cards ever to exist. And it's so fun to build a deck around this card using stuff like Zaborg the Mega Monarch in order to spit different Dragon Synchro monsters into the graveyard to have Stardust Dragon reach over 40,000 or more attack points, which is beyond hilarious. So yeah, building a deck around Converging Wishes is heavily advisable. Alright, now we've made it to the grading scale. In terms of consistency, Synchrons tend to have a lot of internal consistency to perform decent first turns, and with the Speedray engine, it's basically very powerful starting turn. So yeah, usually I'm gonna be actually very generous here. Give him a 2 out of 3. Power doesn't usually amount to much. It's usually a 2 out of 3. They have the potential to hit very hard, but most of the time they focus on clearing the field beforehand and just going in for the kill with average attack monsters in order to finish the opponent off. Comeback ability does exist. The archetype has a lot of it, but some of it can be a bit too specific in order to make the best use out of it. It requires specific top decks of certain monsters, which can trigger multiple effects from the graveyard or from the hand in order to provide a decent link board. So I'm gonna give him a 2 out of 3 there. Protection gets a fat 3 out of 3. This is the Stardust archetype we're talking about. It's all about protection. And as for the versatility, QUASAR, BLAZAR, and Cipher are the best synchro monsters of all time. The decks built around them are topping left and right. Not as much as they could back in the day, but they still have as many options as they don't have as many options as they did back in the day, but they still have just about enough for me to warrant them a 2 out of 3. So yeah, and also the only relevant power output they can produce is with Converging Wishes, and yeah, that card requires a deck being specifically built around it, which usually doesn't run any of the other monsters or cards from the archetype, which we showed here. And yeah, now we've put the 5Ds era completely to rest. Yeah, just like Reigns. And yeah, basically next up we'll be going on to the 2 Zexal era archetypes, and first of which we'll be taking a look at the Galaxy / Photon / Cypher archetype, and I'll see you guys then. Thank you all so much for watching. Stay tuned for more videos, books, and updates. Comment, like, and subscribe. And as usual, I'll upload the next vid whenever I can. See you all. Have a good day and peace.